Respected participants, today I'll be speaking about evolution of Thar Desert in India. Actually, there are various aspects to this evolution, and uh, I was really fortunate in getting the opportunity to be working for nearly a decade in Thar Desert. And I was associated with several international geoscience programs headed by a lot of international experts, and I could, interact and gain quite a lot while working along with these people. And we had a very strong group in India also, led by Professor Ashok Singhvi. So I'll be mentioning more about it when we talk about the absolute dating, the TL and OSL dating aspect of the sediments. And you'll be happy to know that Indian scientist Professor Ashok Singhvi from PRL Ahmedabad, he was the first Indian to have tested this technique for dating of the quaternary sediments. That was, I think, way back in 1984 or so, when a paper by him and Agarwal, it was published in Nature. And that is how the revolution of dating of quaternary sediments started. And we are very proud to be leaders in this particular aspect. So first, let me define what are the dryland environments and what are the deserts, because I was informed that many of our participants are not very much familiar with Western India and this part of dryland environment. So I'll start with these elementary widely accepted definitions. So extremely arid lands, they have less than 100 millimeters of annual rainfall. It's a very dry environment. And many of these areas do not even have rains for consecutively 12 months. So they are extremely dry areas. And then we have the arid lands, which have up to 250 millimeters of annual rainfall. So together, these two categories of regions, arid and extremely arid lands, they define what is truly called as a desert. And these deserts, they show dominance of high-speed winds. And aeolian activities are spontaneous in this. The human interference has got nothing to do with this. There's a lot of dune building and a lot of deflation and other arid-related activities. Then around the margins of these arid lands, we have semi-arid lands, which have annual precipitation going up to 500 millimeters. And they are very famously referred to as steppes. We have a very famous Serengeti grasslands in Africa, which is host to a number of very rare animals and mammals. So to briefly mention again, the deserts and dryland environments, we have barren areas, they are barely capable of supporting life, very harsh living conditions. The water stressed areas, erratic and very low rainfall, and evapotranspiration exceeds precipitation. It's very dry in that way. And very high propensity of droughts. They are subject to total failure of the rainfalls. And the diurnal temperature variation is there, and the daily temperature variations are there. When the sun rises, temperature starts going up, and during noon time, it is very high temperature. And soon after the sunset, there is sudden chilling. These temperatures fall very rapidly. And the vegetation is also mostly xerophytic type, shallow roots. They dominate over the pharetophytes, which are having deeper roots, which can tap the depth to water table. And depth to water table is generally very, very deep in desert environments. And we have internal drainage systems. Most of the channels are just dependent on the, whenever there is a heavy rainfall, they come into action, and they're ephemeral drainage systems. And mostly they end up in local depressions or inland basins. Then the groundwater is also generally brackish, because most of the groundwater movement is also impeded. Naturally, because if there is not much of recharge, so groundwater movement is also sluggish. And because of the high evaporation, it is generally and the soils are again very carbonate rich and mostly salinity affected because of again the high evaporation. And there is dominance of aeolian geomorphic activities. Wind related activities are dominant in desert and dry environments. Now, naturally, there are natural reasons for this. We have these atmospheric circulation patterns, which are driven by the energy from the sun, and the tilt of the Earth, which is 23.5 degrees. It exposes different segments of the surface of Earth to the sun, solar energy, and there is a differential heating that produces the atmospheric circulation patterns. And because of this circulation pattern, we have confinement of the deserts and dryland environments, say mostly between 15-degree latitude to 30-degree latitude, both on the northern hemisphere as well as on the southern hemisphere. They are generally called the horse latitudes because for the sea voyages, the ships who would be carrying the horses, they would be rudderless and no directional movement would be there. So they had to reduce the load of the ship. And many of them would resort to dumping of their horses. And that's how this term came into being. These are the horse latitudes. And this is how the dryland environments are confined. We have this very extremely arid areas in Sahara, Arab, and then parts of India, and of course Mongolia, and in the American continent we have Sonoran, Mexico desert, Atacama in Latin America, then Namibia and Australia. Of course, the major chunk of the land in Australia is all deserts. So most of the human settlements are around the coastal tracts only. The next question is, why should we study drylands and deserts? This is so important. First is that it's a unique and very fragile ecological system. And the other major aspect is that it is occupied by nearly 41% of the population, right? And nearly 77% of Australia's land is all desert. 66% of the Africa continent is desert. 40% of Asia is also desert and dryland, and 24% of Europe, 15% of Latin America, they are all dryland environments. And they are home to nearly 38% of Earth's population. That is around 3 billion people. They live here in these dryland environments. And they also support nearly half of world's cultivated systems. So a lot of agricultural produce are also created in these semi-arid areas, and half of its livestock. Most of the local people all over the world in these dryland environments, they are engaged in animal husbandry, and nearly half of the world supply is actually achieved through this kind of livelihood in the desert population. So the second important aspect is that many of the former desert areas, which are presently having non-arid environment, they are called the paleo deserts, and they also host a number of oil and gas resources, and therefore it is very important to study the actual geological aspects of the dryland environments. Even in the past, it has been happening in the Earth's geological history. And then, of course, we have extraterrestrial deserts which exist in other planets. Mars is another good example, wherein a lot of desert-like situations are actually there, and they are being interpreted from the images that we get from the spaceships. Third important aspect, which is very important, is the taming of the desert and drylands, because most of the civilizations have prospered in the desert and semi-desert environments, semi-arid environments, like Egyptian, Mesopotamia, Sumerian, Saraswati, Indus, which is Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and Rakhigiri is the latest find in Haryana. There are a number of geoarchaeological excavations are there. So we have a very strong Saraswati Indus civilization, which is studied in great details nowadays. So this was the cradle for human evolution also. And life on Earth actually began and evolved in water initially. So if you study the Earth's history, so most of the life forms, they were in the oceans. And the moment Earth started getting its ozone layer, then the life forms, they started migrating on the land. So we had the amphibian life in the beginning, and then gradually the land was also occupied by the living organisms. So, and the drylands are the last frontiers for human expansions on land surface of Earth. So this is again a very challenging environment. And the dryland people have developed their own unique strategies to cope up with this climatic variability. And particularly the rainwater harvesting systems, the cultivation practices, and they have adapted to these harsh conditions. Now, there are both two aspects. One is how people have adapted to the harsh conditions in dryland environments, and other is how future of deserts is going to change the adaptability of the humans. So these two are the two coins of the two sides of the same coin that I'll be explaining and mentioning again in my subsequent details while we mention about the resource utilization in the deserts. Fourth important aspect is combating desertification and mitigating the droughts. You see this picture, it's a huge, massive dust storm. Now, this is happening because of the land degradation, which is a very common practice, and a lot of marginal lands are being overexploited. And this overutilization of the natural resources, so groundwater, has increased the instability. They have destabilized the surface and made available the sand and silt content for the winds to work on. And that is how these storms of sand and dust storms are very frequent. They are happening particularly during just the transitional months, particularly April month, when we are just beginning. The monsoon wind patterns are getting stronger and stronger. And from end of June or July, we start getting the rains. But from April to June end, April, May, June, these 3 months are the most vulnerable periods for the dust storms which are created. Of course, they are being stabilized now because of the lot of other measures. So we need to understand this phenomena and how best to control it. Again, depends on our detailed studies of this aeolian dynamism and such aspects. Fifth one is again very important. It is now gaining currency the world over. That is the geodiversity and biodiversity, which is present in the desert environments. So therefore, very rare rocks and fossils and spectacular landscapes. So these are the very important areas which attract a lot of tourists. And therefore, we need to really understand and educate the tourists also that there is a responsible tourism and there is a sustainability, and we also conserve or geoconserve our resources and such geodiversity and biodiversity. So therefore, we really need to understand the finer intricacies and the kind of infrastructural support which is needed for developing such resources, particularly the application of engineering and modern technology, which is called upon to bring us some sustainable solutions for such increased footfalls in such fragile environments. So next I'll be talking about is the types of deserts and drylands. Now, they are basically classified by their geographical location and dominant weather conditions which are prevalent. So therefore, we have hot and dry subtropical deserts. Sahara is the major example. Sahara, Syria, and of course our own Thar Desert is part of this. Great Victoria in Australia. And then we have mid-latitude, that is cold deserts. In India, we have the example at Ladakh, and then Gobi and Taklamakan in Mongolia. And then coastal deserts are also important. Namibia and Sonoran Desert in Mexico, they are the important examples. And polar deserts, they are Antarctica and Arctic regions. So the deserts are always dry and they support a unique dryland ecosystem, that is fauna and flora. So I'm showing you the Earth's 10 largest deserts that we have on globe. So we have the Sahara Desert, then Gobi, Arabian, Syrian, and Kalahari deserts, Patagonia in Latin America, Great Basin in North America, and Great Victoria Desert in Australia. Again, I'm showing you some more deserts. All these brown colored features are dryland environments. So this is how the desert is distributed. Equator is in the middle, and most of these deserts, as you would notice, are confined to 30 degrees north and south. Some are, of course, transgressing further down, but they are not very major deserts. They have other reasons. You know, for example, they are coastal deserts and mid-latitude deserts. Paleo deserts, you know, these are the Jurassic Aeolianites, for example. In Arizona and America, we have such beautiful Aeolian structures preserved in the rock records, and they in themselves are major tourist attractions. Beautiful features are there, and even in Australia, we have this Uluru Ayers Rock, Australia, which are, you know, the bone hearts. They are the typical residual erosional surfaces. You just see the bare rocky outcrops there, and they are being abraded by the winds. And they are nice, nice scenic beauty, and people visit such places also for recreation and relaxation there. So another example in Oman, Jebel Hill. Such, you know, bare rocky outcrops are there. You see, desert generally they are not all sands. There are a number of rocky features, and we just explaining few more aspects of the deserts. It's not just only sand. It's not only the sand dunes. We have another 6 types of the landscape domains. Just to show you the various features, you know, the rocky pedestals and natural bridge, which is again eroded by the winds and all that. And dunes, of course, the major attraction, and particularly the rippled surfaces. These are the patterned grounds, which are really beautiful to look in, and also such a nicely graded and very well sorted sand that if you just put your hand through it, it will slip out and nothing will stick to your hands. You know, it's such a clean sand as such. So it's a very good experience. People roll down on such slopes and enjoy this visit to the deserts. But then it is, you know, great, not only for the tourism point of view, but from the studies point of view. Now I'll come to the Thar Desert per se. See, Thar Desert is actually spread in the Indian subcontinent. On the east, we are having Aravalli Hills, which is forming northeasterly trending series of ridges. And on the west, the Thar Desert extends right up to Indus River, right in Pakistan now. So Indian part of the desert is called Thar, and the part of the desert which is extending across the border is called Thar Parker. So total is the Great Thar Desert in Indian subcontinent. And we have on the right hand side, I am showing you the aridity affected tracts with these green stipples, and the pink colored is shown as the desert margin. Satellite image, IRS image, the Thar Desert is there, and on the right side it's the Google image, which is showing you the extension of the Thar Desert, which is extending on western Rajasthan right up to the northern parts of Gujarat, and Kutch. Kutch is the major area which is all affected by the aridity, and quite a lot of Saurashtra is also affected by the dryland environments. Now this map of India is showing you the distribution of the aridity and semi-arid areas. See, right through the peninsular India also we are having these dryland environments, particularly in Telangana, Andhra Pradesh. If you remember, you know, one of the earliest environmental geological investigations that Geological Survey was to cover, that Anantapur district. You know, it was a very a classical example of environmental geological investigations. So Anantapur district is heredity affected. I remember those days, it was the constituency of um, Neelam Sanjeeva Reddy sir. So he had won from there, and there were requests, there were demands that Geological Survey of India should do detailed investigations to see what kind of terrain is there and how best to utilize the resources. So you can see that these are the arid areas. Some spots are there right in the peninsular India, close to Hyderabad, and we have a lot of good outcrops, which are good terrain, which is affected by the semi-arid environment. And of course, the arid Western India, again, this is how Kazri, the Central Arid Zone Research Institute, the Ministry of Agricultural Research, they have classified this because they are studying the various productivity aspects and how best the deserts can be tamed and what kind of agricultural practices can be adopted with dryland agriculture. And of course, now with the advent of the Indra Canal water, how best it is being utilized now. That those aspects are being studied in details at Kazri. So some of my very close friends have been there, and we were associated in our multi-institutional team with Kazri. Late Dr. Dheer, Amal Kar, and Ashok Singhvi, and then Deccan College group, Dr. Shila Mishra, Rajaguru Saab, they were all associated, and a lot of detailed investigations on different fronts were carried out by this multi-institutional team. That is how I have been associated with this group right from the beginning, way back in early 90s. Now, this is a classical photo interpretation and satellite imagery interpreted map. It was published way back in 1979 it was edited by McKee, and they, in fact, the Landsat images had been just made available, and based on that interpretation, they have studied the various dune forms occurring in different deserts of the world. That's the classical book, the sand deposits, and this was the initial classification which was available to us to further work on, and subsequently Geological Survey of India and even Kazri, they have fine-tuned and more better resolved maps out of this. So essentially, we see a huge area covered by the parabolic dunes. In fact, parabolic dunes, as I will be explaining again, they are not simple parabolic, they are clustered parabolic dunes. The arms are being shared. They are more rake-like parabolic dunes. So this was essentially on this kind of to find out the genetic explanation, how and why this type of parabolic dune has evolved in Thar Desert. It's a unique landform in Thar Desert. Nowhere else in the world we have this type of clustered parabolic dunes. So I'll be explaining again on more on these aspects. Then we have the linear dunes and transverse dunes. They are the major aspects, which are again defined as per the orientation of the winds which have created them, and crescentic dunes in rest of the desert. Again, this desert landscapes, I was just mentioning that it is not only the sand dunes, we have rocky uplands and hamada or structural rocky plains, sand dunes, which are of course very important components, and their percentage varies from desert to desert. Then we have stony desert, which are deflation plains, and playas or the inland lakes, and loess or massive silt, that is mostly the suspension load deposits, and then the ephemeral channels. So I'll be explaining their occurrences one by one in Thar Desert. So first, let's see rocky uplands and hamada. This is an outstanding example of the rocky upland. This is Jaisalmer Sonar Killa, the Satyajit Ray's famous film. So this golden fort, golden yellow fort, it rises and shines in a golden way. particularly during the sunset times. So this is a rocky upland example. A number of Havelis, most of the buildings built here in around Jaisalmer, they use this yellow limestone of Jurassic age. Such rocky outcrops, these are the residual hills, and you see very highly accentuated bedding. So this is actually it's produced because of the constant abrasion by the winds, which are sand laden. They keep hitting such rocky outcrops, and that's how you see the very well defined bedding nature. And many of the places, they are just scooped out. On the right side, you see the rocky uplands also, sometimes they get buried under these obstacle dune formations. So this is very important site which has actually got us a very good outcrop, which gave us a real good insight into the evolution of the Thar Desert. I'll just show you that subsequently. Similarly, here, this is keep part of the Sandra granite close to Pali in the desert environment. So these scooped out features are called taphones. Most of you are familiar. So this is also again due to heavy bombardment of the sand blown by the winds. And it has taken thousands of years to scoop out such excavated nature of the outcrops, and number of other sculptures are also created. And we have a National Geological Monument also identified in this particular area. The various other bare rocky outcrops are shown there, and you see this right side feature here. You see this notch. This is the toe erosion. The deserts have a very characteristic flash flooding feature. Whenever it rains, and rains very heavy, but in a very short duration, we get a lot of heavy precipitation. And some of these dry channels, they become torrential that way, and they have good erosive power. And because of that erosive power, they have scooped out this particular notch here. This is in Jaisalmer. So this is the toe erosion, and in fact, it is the eroded nature by the flow of water, seasonal flow of water. Again, this because of the diurnal temperature variations, I'm showing you some of these features, how the rocks get shattered. They just crack up, because during the daytime, the temperatures can reach up to 50 degrees centigrade. And after sunset, it can go just close to 0 degree also. So it's such a huge diurnal temperature variation. And if it's happening repeatedly, days after days and months after months, it can result in this kind of cracking. And here, just close to this hammer, you see this subparallel cracking of a particular rock clust, which was actually surrounded, and it was packed by the surrounded clastic components. But then, because of this diurnal variation of temperatures, it cracked, and this is what we call as in situ shattering of the rock. This is again a very characteristic dryland environment feature. These were in Jaisalmer, to tell you more about the location. And again, desert pavement is another important component of the desert environment. And we have this sarir or gravel spread. Our Bap boulder spread and Bhojka is the area on way to Jaisalmer, wherein such gravelly features, such coarse plastic features are seen. In fact, they are the residual gravels, wherein the finer components have been blown away by the winds. And what we are left behind is such coarse plastic components. They are very densely packed. And with the continued abrasion by the wind, many of these the gravels, they develop what we call as patina, or a desert varnish. And they get the smooth shining surface on this. And dry contours and tri-contours, those are the features which develop depending on variation in the winds which are hitting them on these features. Another important find is that we could find many of the Paleolithic tools. This is reported, and this is again studied by the geoarchaeologists. And very broadly, it has been dated. The tool making technology is the is the is the reference here, and it has been dated about 65 to 70 Ka. So these features are also seen in some of these gravels, and since the material is readily available, so it was very easy for the humans that time to do this kind of the percussion type to create sharp edged lithic tools. So this is also reported from the Bojka area. So I've got this feature recorded here. Again, sandy dunes are the typical features. We see beautiful barkans on the left and dust-laden winds on the right side. Some landscapes. Yeah. And clustered parabolic dunes in the Thar Desert. I'm just showing you the satellite IRS image. You just see the vertical view, and I'm trying to show here is the clustered nature. There are the linear arms and these nozzle closures. In this overall shape, I'll just explain. This is forming a crescentic feature. Okay. Normally, they are forming. These are the clustered parabolic dunes, but there are many of such features which I could delineate. They are forming largely a major Varkanoid actually. So this gave me the idea that there is possibly a new method of their formation, which I'll explain subsequently. So we have the linear dunes here and the Varkanoids forming on them, recently active sand accumulation on top of it. This feature are there in the areas west of Jaisalmer, spontaneous wind activity area. The transverse dunes. Again, some further west of Jaisalmer, about 35 kilometers west of Jaisalmer, we have these dune fields, which are actually this area is part of the Desert National Park, but some of it is made open for public to come and study here. And you see these various these camping sites which have come up for the tourists. They enjoy walking and taking camel rides over these particular active sand dunes. And here you see largely they are confined to such linear belts. These are the active barkans, but they are confined to these linear belts separated by the dune-free areas. These are the major interdunes actually. Okay, so this can explain the actual mechanism for their formation. So these barkans I'm just showing you here, which is shaped like this, and the wind directions are also from west to east here. This is in the photograph, and they are very common features of the active sand. Then the next important feature is the desert lakes and the playas, and these are the inland basins wherein the seasonal rainwater accumulates. And many of these flats they become dry soon after the rain season is over, and such playas are called SAR. My friend Ravindranath Sar is there, and I think you may have your ancestral origin from one of such places in Rajasthan. Please don't mind, I'm just joking. So these are very common features in desert. Lunkaran Sar is a famous such playa deposit. Jamsar is a typical playa deposit which is producing a lot of gypsum in Thar Desert. So these are the features. The Pokhran on top, and many of these interdune features, which are playas, they have a lot of calcareous silty clay material, which is again locally used, called Mudia Mati. And this type of construction material is used particularly in the border areas to build the shoulders of these border roads. Now they are quite cohesive, this kind of material, and they are used in the normal household mud plastered hutments and all that. some of the sections of such playas, and on the right side you see the gypsum layers, how they occur and how they are being excavated from quarries in Mohangad and Kawas near Badmer. These are the, in fact, Rajasthan Desert is the major producer of gypsum. In fact, Rajasthan is the leader producer of the gypsum, supplying gypsum to entire country for plaster of Paris, and it's added in the cements and several other utilities. Fertilizer also is created from this. Very famous Sambar Lake, which has become a tourist destination nowadays. It's a Ramsar site also, but a lot of salt is actually extracted from these features, and this has been there, and salt has been produced from Sambar for more than 1,000 years now, and the salt content is not getting reduced. So there were a number of controversies and number of theories on the origin of salt, how salinity is still continuing despite so much of excavation and mining from this. Okay, so some of the conceptual models which I worked during my early days in GSI and also part of my thesis work. One is I'll be just explaining on the dune fields, the basins distribution and the variation in the elevation ranges. I'll just show you a schematic profile. Second one will be on the expansion and contraction of the aridity, the Aeolian deposits. And the third one will be on the evolution of the parabolic dunes, their origin, and what could have been the major source of sediments, sands for this, and the origin of salinity. And of course, if time permits, I'll again mention about the paleo channels and the lost Saraswati. So you are familiar with this geological map. Many of my friends are there who were posted in Western region. So we have this yellow color is all quaternary sediments, and particularly here it's mostly the desert sediments, dryland environments. Okay, and these colored outcrops are the pre-quaternary rocks which are occurring here. Particularly, they are occurring as bare rocks. But as you come closer to the Aravallis here, they are very nicely vegetated and they receive better rainfall here. So to do detailed research work, for any system studies, the system approach I adopted here, and I could delineate some of these basins. You have to define some boundary conditions. So I could define them in different sub-basins within the Thar Desert. So Jaisalmer Basin, that is Shahghat, Kishangarh Basin on the western part, because this is related to the aridity conditions in the area also. And Nachna, Chhattargarh area, again further north we are having the Ghaggar Basin. Then we have this basin which is now producing oil producing area in the tertiaries. And Shergarh Basin is the major area wherein we have this characteristic parabolic dune occurrences. So I'll be talking more about it. And this particular geomorphic scheme, which I could exercise on number of topo sheets. So I developed a schematic profile. If you move from east to west, let me see if I can shift this. Yeah. Now, if you move from east to west, we have Aravalli hill ranges, and their accordant summits are mostly around 500 meters above mean sea level. Okay. And if you move further away, and there again the rock types are mostly Precambrian. The Delhi supergroup of rocks are there, right? And the Aravalli supergroup itself. So the Precambrian rocks are exposed here. Further west, we are having a small dune field, linear dune field, which is called here as the Medta Degana dune field. This is these dune occurrences are there in the Didwana, Kuchaman, and around the Sambar area and all that. These areas are having these dune fields and the thick column of the quaternary sediments, and their average elevation is 320 to 340 meters above mean sea level. right? So there is a fall in the sea level. And further west, again, there are rocky outcrops. We are having Proterozoic rocks, the Transvindians, that is the Marwar supergroup of rocks, Jodhpur and Nagaur group of rocks exposed here. And we are having the Molanis, which are much older, and they also form number of rocky outcrops within this rocky patch. Around Jodhpur, we are having very nice outcrops, and two major National Geological Monuments are also identified there in this area. Further west, we are having this dune field, which is labeled here as Shergarh Phalodi dune field. And you see the elevation, average elevation is 210 to 245 meters. So nearly 100 meters fall you can see in this particular dune field from the previous Merta Degana dune field. Okay. Further west, if you move along this particular profile, that is around say 27 degrees north, we are having the rocky outcrops, mostly Mesozoics, and tertiary outcrops are there. And this is the Jaisalmer rocky plain. We are having this Pokhran. There are some internal drainage basins in this area. And further west, which is the major dune field, that is the Jaisalmer, Shahgarh, Kishangarh dune field, their average elevation is 80 to 120 meters. What I'm again trying to highlight here is that if you move from east to west, there is geological younging of the rock types, okay, from Precambrian to Tertiary. This is one. The other important inference is that the dune fields here are occurring at different level, different elevations with respect to the mean sea level. So there is a fall, and this has been interpreted if you superimpose the lineaments and other tectonic features. So this is interpreted as half grabens. There is a step-like fall as you move from east to west. And further west of this Jaisalmer basin, we are having the Indus River, which is again 10 to 20 meters above mean sea level. That is the further subsided block, and it has been hosting the river itself, and river is not able to come out of this particular trough as such. So this is a very important inference as per the basin architecture of Thar Desert is concerned. Then we could study through the fieldwork that I was doing interior areas. So one of the shallow quarries wherein this Murdia Mati or this calcrete was being excavated way back in 90s, early 90s. So it could show number of horizons of the Aeolian deposits sandwiched by the colluvium, by the coarse clastics. That you can see these light colored features here. There are at least 4 such layers which are sandwiched by this coarse colluvium, right? And again, thanks to Professor Singhvi's group, we could not only do the detailed logging, but we could also do the dating of these Aeolian sediments. And we could come to know that they belong to different distinctive Aeolian episodes: 60 to 70, 55 to 60, 43 to 55, 25 to 43 Ka, right? And then topmost was less than 10 Ka, right? And then subsequently, the isotopic studies were also carried out on oxygen and carbon isotope studies and all that. So this gave us an idea that the Aeolian accumulation has not been a uniform process in Thar Desert. It has happened in distinctive windows wherein the winds had gained a stronger momentum because of the arid conditions. And that's how we could get preservation of some of these Aeolian layers. And that would give us a handle on how to interpret their evolutionary aspects. This was close to the ridges. That's how we were calling them colluvium. But farther off, they were represented by these thick Aeolian sand sheets. And while mapping in geologic terms, I could label them in Chamu formation. And we have the details in the dates, wherein the oldest one has been dated as 160 thousand years, Ka. And then we have average dates I'm giving you in black and in brackets. This is the range, 90 and 60 Ka. This is Chamu formation. Then we are having the wetter, most dominant wet episode, 50 to 30 Ka. And again, 27, that is 25 to 27.5 Ka. Aeolian dynamic event is also there, which again I'll relate it to the formation of the major crescentic dunes, which were subject to a lot of deflation during the subsequent Aeolian intensification from 17 to 13 Ka, which created these clustered parabolic dunes. This is what I'm calling as sheargut formation. And then another superimposed layer of dunes, because the multi-layered dunes are there. They are created by 6 to 5 Ka dry event. The next model which we can understand is the spread or the distribution of the dunes or the Aeolian landforms, right? So it's again by corollary. If you see this is 25 centimeters rainfall ISO hat, 250 millimeters. Okay, this is A. This line, this is defining the most arid conditions on the west. Okay, this is as I explained, this is the typical desert, Jaisalmer and further Nachna and Bikaner areas. Okay, so west of this particular ISO hat, we see spontaneous Aeolian activity. There's no influence of the human effects. Okay? It's not desertification. It is the spontaneous dune forming migration of the sand happening in this area. Okay. Now, as you move eastwards, we are having these 500 millimeters ISO hat, and further west we are having higher rainfall categories. Now there is a gradient of the rainfall, from eastern higher rainfall domains to western lower rainfall domains. This is the present day scenario. Now, if you extend this kind of interpretation to study the occurrences of the dunes, now they are stabilized, the sea line here, they are the stabilized dunes. Right around Jaipur also we are having stabilized dunes in the form of sand sheets, the Aeolian sand sheets actually. So the actual dune morphology is obliterated because of the subsequent changes in the climate and all that. But then the very occurrence of such Aeolian deposits indicates that the wind conditions and the rainfall conditions must have been similar to what is happening west of this ISO hat here, 250. So this 250 millimeters ISO hat must have transgressed to this area, to here. Okay, where we have this dune formation, spontaneous Aeolian activity. So as the crow flies, this distance is nearly 350 kilometers. So the dunes which are now dated here, these are at least 16 Ka layer. Okay, so this particular dune was forming around 16,000 years earlier, had similar aridity which is prevailing presently here, west of Jaisalmer, around Jaisalmer. Okay, so this is one interpretation that the present day desert conditions have contracted. They have moved westwards, right? When there is expansion, they move eastward. That means they transgress towards east. The wind activity is dominant, getting dominant as one moves from west to east. Okay, but at present, the Aeolian activities are natural Aeolian activities are confined to areas west of these 250 millimeters ISO hat. Okay. I'm just refreshing your knowledge on this Paleogene and Neogene, because most of this geomorphology that we know from the basic principles of geomorphology are not older than tertiary. So most of the expressions of the rocky outcrops, although the age of the rocks themselves may be much older, they could be Precambrian, but their physiographic expression, their geomorphic expression is not older than the tertiaries, that is Paleogene or the Neogene. And I'll just explain how the salinity of the uh, playas and the lakes within the desert is explained by one of these correlations. Now we have this map of tertiary sea. This is again I have picked from very famous compilation by H.S. Parikh Saab in GSI. So he had worked on the pre-quaternary details of Western India. So this was the limit of the occurrence of the tertiary rocks. And the fossils in tertiary Banda and Koyala formations, these are the limestone formations, and they contain foraminifera fossils, and they are right from the Middle Eocene, not older than Middle Eocene. That means the sea existed only up to Middle Eocene in these parts, and then it was drained out because of the these tectonic activities and the push of the Indian plate against the Laurentian plate, and the sea was drained out. Now, if the sea was there, naturally the salinity, the saline composition of the sea water, it has remained there. It has affected the basement rocks and all that. And this is also explained as one of the reasons for the available salinity which is prevailing in the quaternary sediments which were deposited subsequently on this particular terrain, right? Other great help that was there was the investigation for potash mineralization in northern part of the Thar Desert. So our good old friend Dr. Virender Kumar and myself, we were working, and he was working for the Hansel and this Evaporate group of investigations. But then with my association, I could relog many of the boreholes which were drilled for potash investigation. Initially, they were not doing any coring for the quaternaries and even for tertiaries. They were just coring whenever the Marwar supergroup, the Nagaur sandstone, would encounter. So then I requested, I'm really grateful. Those days, Dr. D.K. Ray was our DDG. So with my request, they permitted me to study some of the ongoing boreholes with the cores. So we could relog, and you see how the distribution of the quaternary column and the tertiary column. This tertiary is green colored here, and this yellow is the quaternary. This purple is again the Nagaur sandstone. So how you see they are occurring at different elevations, how the faults are inferred from there. And on this right side, this is the isopac map showing you the contours of the depth of the basement of the quaternary formations. So you see sudden deepening of the quaternary, that is thickening of the quaternary columns. Just north of this is a major fracture. It's the rising Tonk lineament also. This is a major fault actually. So this has created a thick trough in the northern parts, in the Hanumangarh area, the Ganganagar area and all that, wherein the quaternary sediments, sometimes they attain the thickness of up to 300 meters. This is again the extension of the Indo-Gangetic alluvium. But then we have the preservation of the Aeolian sediments also buried in this sequence. Okay, so we could infer, and that was the actual. It was a major find that whatever the paleo channels and the lost Saraswati route, and there were some papers which were insisting that the channels could flow through the desert on some of these. These are the major uplands. The channels could not have flown across them. They remained confined, and they could flow only around further west of these. That is another subject in itself. It's a very detailed study. wherein this present day Ghaggar and Hakra. Hakra is also kind of ephemeral stream which used to flow, and that possibly has been the root of the Saraswati. That is how the changes came about. So this part I have already explained, and we know that the Indus Valley civilization was prospering, say around 4.5 to 3.5 Ka earlier. And because of the increased desiccation and tectonic movements, wherein the Saraswati lost its vigor and its water flow, because the Yamuna also migrated eastward and joined the Ganges system. Although the Yamuna and the Satluj earlier, they were contributing to Saraswati. So that is how the whole thing has been going around. Okay, so these are some of the classical views how the dunes are evolving from Barkan shape to linear shapes. And on the right side, you see the vortices, how the wind features are created. It's not a single linear flow of the winds. It is always in the form of such helical movements. So that is how we get the bands of Aeolian occurrences separated by the areas which are free of the dunes. Another classical interpretation for the formation of the parabolic dunes, wherein the sand supply, the wind strength, and the vegetation cover, these are the important contributing factors which actually define the formation of dunes. But my interpretation, this could be there for the coastal dunes, coastal parabolic dunes. But for the rake-like parabolic dunes, I'll just show you this figure. This is how I interpreted from the satellite image. I could trace their outlines of the linear features and the closures. So they occur in such clusters, and then they are separated by interdunes, which are free of the dunes. Now these are the sandy sheets in between. Okay. So if you study their configuration, particularly in this enlarged view I'm showing you, they are forming this kind of Barkan, this kind of massive accumulation of sand. These are very discrete accumulation of sand, and they have been subsequently subject to very strong winds, deflationary processes. So it is not the gentle winds which normally give rise to the coastal parabolic dunes, but here in this our case, it must have been a very strong deflationary Aeolian activity which could carve out, which could scoop out the depressions as interdune features and then create this rake-like occurrence of the shared arms of the parabolic dune. And this view has been accepted, and I have published it in international journals also. So this is the new model for development of the parabolic dunes, the Thar Desert. Briefly on the mineral resources, Dr. Monty, please tell me how much time is there, because I should not exceed your time limit.
You can take 10 minutes maximum.
Okay, sure. I'll just try to quickly rush through. So mineral resources are also very important. We have gypsum and other evaporite deposits. Sodium nitrate is the major product from the Atacama Desert, and calcrete, and the gypsum, they are very important for most of the desert environments. Calcrete is calcium carbonate, what we call as conchers normally. Then we have a number of queries for sandstone and marble and granite, very important construction material. Oil and natural gas, and of course lignite deposits are there in Thar. Then quite recently, we are also investigating the REE mineral occurrences in Barmed area, that is within the Malani suite of acid volcanics. And the lithium-bearing evaporites are also reported in some other conditions, but we need to do more detailed investigation in Rajasthan. Water resources, of course, to mitigate the drought proneness, the Indra Nahar Pariyojana, the Rajasthan Canal, it was initially designed, initially it was meant for the strategic reasons. It was following along the international border with Pakistan. So to supply the drinking water to our army establishments and all that, and then to create a deep ditch so that the heavy vehicles cannot cross it. So it was the initial purpose, but then it created a lot of command area wherein good irrigation practices were adopted. Initially, the flood level irrigation practices were adopted. That resulted in a lot of water logging and increased soil salinity, and those problems were there. But subsequently, these are better controlled now. Some of the shots to show you the traditional water harvesting systems. And this is the canal, and it has created a huge belt of green forest on either banks. So that has actually created the micro environment and also invited re-establishment of the fauna and flora. The biodiversity aspect is also taken care. So these are the plus advantages of this. Now the point is how best to manage this water resource. We have imported this Himalayan fresh water through this canal into dryland environment wherein evaporation is also very high. Now how best to conserve it, and how best to see to it that the soil fertility is not lost, and this better consumption pattern and better efficiency of water usage. So the sprinklers and drip irrigation, they are being practiced in many of these parts. This is the future of the desert, how things are. And then, of course, to create this kind of situation, there's a lot of leveling of the dunes is taking place. Now, that is the destabilizing feature, and that is creating its own set of problems. And of course, we need to take care of these aspects also. And then three major cities, Jaisalmer, Jodhpur, and Bardmer, these cities also have been planned to get water supply. The urban settlements are growing, and drinking water supply is being made through this Indira Canal water. And what is happening to the discharge, where the outflow is, we need to do a lot of detailed investigation on that, so that the water budgeting aspect is also taken care of. Geotourism is another major resource which is actually being tapped and needs to be tapped in more realistic manners. So Jodhpur and Jaisalmer are the essentials, and we have the geoheritage sites, geological monuments, which are again preserved and available to people. So the major forts here, in fact, the Jaisalmer fort is World Heritage Site now, one of the hill forts, and it's the living fort actually. Many of the descendants of the earlier rulers, they are still living within this fort. So it's a very unique kind of fort, Solar Killa. Of course, the biodiversity, the famous Indian bustard, the great Indian bustard, which is actually in the list of birds which are getting extinct, but it is being conserved here. They are increasing in population here. Then deserts are the rich resources for renewable energy, the winds and the solar, which is again being tapped very nicely. So concluding this, we have huge thick columns of Neogene and Quaternary sedimentation in Ghaggar Basin and parts of the Shergarh Basin. Then, of course, the low-lying areas, they were the favored sites for the sand accumulation. And as per the physics of the blown sand, the sands will, they will be thrown away from the hard substrate, because of the bouncing, this traction system, and they'll be accumulating wherever the sediment cushioning is there. Once the sand sheet is established, only then the sand dunes, they start taking shape. And of course, then there are ways to, do more detailed investigations, particularly related to the import of the water. And we need to do more detailed laboratory investigations, sedimentological investigations, and mineralogical investigation, heavy minerals and all that. And particularly the geochemical mapping on the ephemeral drainage, which can give us good clues on the mineral wealth locked up in these Precambrian rocks here. So with these points, I'll conclude my talk here. So thank you very much once again for your patient hearing.